Some stories are told in epics, others in just 11 words. It was cold and alone, and it was ready to give up. In the vast digital galaxies of Stellaris, this single sentence haunts players more than any planetary invasion or galactic genocide. Welcome to Stellaris, everyone's favorite genocide simulator. A game where you can systematically exterminate entire sentient species, crack planets like eggs for breakfast, and enslave alien populations for the crime of having tentacles instead of proper human arms. All while maintaining a perfectly clear conscience because hey, those Xeno scum probably had it coming. I mean, have you seen the Blorg? Absolutely hideous. That's a face that practically begs to be neutron swept. And yet, in this playground of cosmic devastation, where entire civilizations can be casually erased with the click of a button, it's often the quietest moments that hit the hardest. Thousands of years ago, on a nameless world, the core temperature began to drop. Slowly at first, perhaps, then with terrifying speed. An entire civilization, faced with their inevitable extinction, made a choice born of desperation rather than hope. They didn't launch towards the stars, they didn't wage war for dwindling resources. They dug, down, ever downward, following the retreating warmth of their dying world. Imagine that moment of realization, that singular terrible understanding that the cold wasn't temporary. The hushed conversations, the frightened glances, the moment when their brightest minds abandoned dreams of space travel and turned instead to designing machines that could burrow deeper into the planet's crust. Artists who once painted skies now decorated cavern walls. Children born who would never see stars, who would only know the weight of stone above and the promise of warmth below. And so they descended. Generation after generation, a society transformed by a singular purpose: survival at any cost. What stories did they tell themselves in those dark tunnels? What songs did they sing to keep the cold at bay? Did they still remember the surface world, or had it become just another myth, a fairy tale for children who had never seen the sky? Their numbers dwindled as the relentless cold pursued them. Some froze when heating systems failed. Others starved when food supplies ran out. Many were crushed as unstable passages collapsed under the weight of the world above. Each death diminished not just their population, but their collective memory, their shared knowledge, their hope. And then, in the deepest shaft, where even their mighty digging machines had fallen silent and broken, a single fossilized data card. Its message, those 11 words that contain an entire world of suffering. It was cold and alone, and it was ready to give up. With that simple statement, everything they were, their art, their music, their dreams, their fears, vanished into the darkness. No monuments, no legacy, just a whisper that faded into silence, waiting for someone to hear it. In Stellaris, this entire extinction event, this generational tragedy, occupies little more than a text box that most of us dismiss with a single click. A minor archaeological discovery worth only 5 society research. The death of an entire civilization, reduced to a momentary interruption between more pressing concerns of empire management and fleet deployments. And herein lies the fascinating paradox of this game. Get it? Sorry. Stellaris presents itself as a grand strategy experience, a game of sprawling empires and cosmic domination. Yet hidden within its fast framework, tucked away in these easily dismissed narrative fragments, lies its most profound storytelling. We spend hours zoomed out, orchestrating the movements of mighty fleets, balancing sprawling economies, and negotiating with alien diplomats. But it's in zooming in to these fleeting text boxes, these brief archaeological discoveries, these seemingly inconsequential event chains, that we find the game's hidden soul. These aren't just flavor text, they're not just some random encounters to break up the gameplay. They are the philosophical and emotional foundations upon which the entire Stellaris experience is built. They ask us questions that the mechanics alone never could. Yet the greatest tragedy isn't contained within these stories themselves. It's that most players will never truly read them. In our rush to optimize and expand, We dismiss these windows with barely a glance, never realizing that the game's writers have crafted intricate narratives that challenge us to consider what it truly means to build an empire among the stars. What is the purpose of galactic domination if we ignore the stories of those who tried and failed before us? What can we learn from civilizations that reached for the stars and fell short? How can we understand our place in the cosmos if we don't pause to consider the existential questions these tiny narratives pose? This video was inspired by a Reddit post that struck me deeply. A veteran described how, despite thousands of hours in Stellaris, the cold and alone event still affected them every time. They wrote about having witnessed the full spectrum of human experience, from war zones to childbirth, from a child's joy to an old man's death, from simple beauty to harsh survival. Yet despite all these profound real-life moments, they concluded that nothing had prepared them for encountering those 11 words. That's the power of these easily overlooked narratives. In the midst of a game where we casually commit atrocities that would make historical dictators blush, these small windows into other lives, even fictional digital ones, can pierce through our strategic calculations and touch something fundamentally human within us. Today we'll explore these easily overlooked stories, not just as curiosities or sole content, but as the beating heart of what makes Stellaris more than just another strategy game. We'll uncover how these micro-narratives transform our understanding of the game as a whole, and perhaps, in doing so, we'll learn to listen more carefully to the quieter voices that so often get lost in the vastness of space. After all, in a universe of endless stars and countless civilizations, sometimes the most profound stories are the ones told in just 11 words. Stellaris presents players with dozens of archaeological sites in a typical playthrough. Most of them follow familiar sci-fi tropes, ancient weapons, mysterious precursor technology, evidence of once mighty empires. Players typically approach these sites with the clinical detachment of a resource gatherer. Which one will provide the best strategic advantage? Which might contain a relic or insight that could benefit my empire? The Get Inside site initially appears no different. The first excavation phase reveals traces of a subterranean civilization, promising but hardly unique in a galaxy filled with ruins. There's no immediate indication that what awaits is anything more than the usual society research bonus and perhaps some minor artifacts. It's this context of mechanical efficiency that makes the emotional gut punch of the Cold and Alone event so unexpected. We approach these archaeological sites as managers of an empire, not as witnesses to tragedy. Our focus is typically on what we might gain, not what was lost. Consider the scale Stellaris operates on. Star systems are reduced to icons, planets to resource nodes, and populations to abstract numbers. The entire game trains us to zoom out, to view the galaxy as a board where civilizations rise and fall in the grand scheme of things, to look at the macro, not the micro. But the Cold and Alone event forces us to zoom in, not just to a planet or a species, but to a singular individual, the last of their kind. What's most striking is that after encountering this profound moment of loss, the galaxy doesn't pause. No special achievement, no artifact, not even a name to remember them by. The game continues, indifferent, like time itself. We discover that the planet's core temperature dropped catastrophically, not gradually over millions of years as with natural cooling, but rapidly, within what would have been a single generation of this species. The archaeological evidence shows something rarely depicted in science fiction. Not a civilization that reached for the stars and failed, but one that turned inwards in pure desperation. What's remarkable here, though, is the restraint in the writing. The event doesn't explain why the planet cooled, it doesn't name the species, it doesn't detail their technology or culture. This absence of information doesn't weaken the narrative, it strengthens it. Our minds fill these gaps with something more horrifying than anything explicitly stated. The archaeological evidence shows that this wasn't a quick extinction either. Generation after generation dug deeper, watching their population shrink as they pursued the retreating warmth. Some froze in tunnels when heating systems failed, others starved, many died in tunnel collapses. And then the final discovery, that data card. Not grand final words, no philosophical insights about the universe, just the raw admission of defeat. What strikes me about this event is how it subverts our expectations of extinction narratives. Most stories about the end of civilizations focus on dramatic moments, asteroid impacts, nuclear war, plague. But this event captures something more insidious. A slow, grinding decline where each generation has a little less hope than the last. And then, just like that, you click continue. Your research ship moves on to the next anomaly. Your empire expands, wars are fought, technologies are researched. But those 11 words linger. Perhaps what makes this event so effective is how it contrasts with Stellaris' usual tone. This is a game where you can enslave entire species, crack planets in half, or assimilate biological life into machine consciousness. The scale is so vast that individual suffering itself becomes abstracted, just another minus happiness modifier. But here, just for a moment, the game zooms in on one being, the last of its kind, giving up in a hand-dug tunnel. And suddenly, all that abstraction falls away. We are no longer thinking about resource outputs or strategic advantages. We're thinking about what it means to be the last, to know that when you're gone, everything your civilization ever was disappears with you. The power of this event also lies in its brevity. Stellaris often tells stories through lengthy text boxes with detailed lore or complex branching choices. But Cold and Alone presents its narrative with striking simplicity. There are no dialogue options, no moral choices, no opportunity to intervene. We are simply observers to a tragedy that concluded long before we arrived. This combination of helplessness and intimacy resonates with players in a way that even the game's most dramatic moments rarely achieve. We can prevent a war, we can save a species from a plague, we can evacuate a planet before it explodes. But we cannot reach back through time to save this lone survivor who dug until they could dig no more. However, what this event demonstrates is Stellaris' ability to create profound emotional moments using only text and context. It's not alone in this respect. Throughout the game, buried among routine anomalies and archaeological sites, are other stories that challenge our perception of what a grand strategy game can make us feel. When players begin a new game of Stellaris, the galaxy randomly assigns them one of several precursor empires to investigate. These ancient civilizations, long extinct before the player's empire emerged, are revealed gradually through archaeological fragments scattered across star systems. Most players view these chains primarily as a race towards a valuable relic or powerful technology, or even a system with otherwise unattainable resources or buildings. The Valtaum star assembly initially appears to be another typical fallen empire. The first few archaeological sites paint a picture of a highly advanced, prosperous civilizations with billions of citizens, extensive trade networks, and sophisticated virtual reality technology. Nothing particularly unusual for a science fiction setting. But as players uncover more sites, the Valtaum narrative begins its subtle descent into existential horror. Reports of a popular VR game with billions of players, strange academic papers theorizing about the nature of reality, a commercial space station repurposed for evangelizing an unusual belief system, resulting in reduced traffic and eventual abandonment. What makes the Valtaum story disturbing isn't cosmic horror or graphic violence, but the methodical documentation of a species' collective mental unraveling. Through clinical psychological reports, we witness an entire civilization gradually convince itself that their universe is merely a simulation, a video game being played by unseen entities. There's a chilling quality to how their delusion is presented, not as a sudden madness, but as a logical progression. Observation, hypothesis, consensus, action. The event text never explicitly tells us they were wrong, it simply documents, with bureaucratic detachment, the steps of their reasoning and their ultimate conclusion. The final revelation is delivered with the same clinical tone as the rest. The Valtaum, convinced they were trapped in a simulation, performed a coordinated empire-wide act of mass suicide using neutron torpedoes and any other means available. Their goal? To generate so many simultaneous deaths that they would crash the system and escape their simulated reality. The existential dread of this narrative is amplified by its meta-contextual irony. The Valtaum were, at least from our perspective, exactly right. They do exist within a simulation. They are digital entities in a video game called Stellaris, yet their attempts to crash the game was fundamentally flawed. In the cruel mathematics of game design, removing an entire empire's worth of population would actually improve performance, rather than crash it. This realization creates a unique form of tragedy. As players, we are literally the unseen entities the Valtaum feared. We can pause their universe, save and reload their timeline, or abandon them entirely by starting a new game. They were correct about their existential condition, yet completely powerless to change it. What distinguishes the Valtaum narrative from other precursor chains is its philosophical depth. While most fallen empires in science fiction succumb to conventional threats, war, environmental disaster, technological hubris, the Valtaum perished from an idea. Their annihilation wasn't forced upon them by external circumstances, but chosen collectively based on a shared belief. The event text notes that those who didn't believe in the simulation theory were too few to rebuild their civilization. This subtle detail adds another layer of tragedy. There were skeptics, voices of reason, who tried to prevent the catastrophe, but they were outnumbered and ultimately left alone in a galaxy of empty colonies and abandoned stations. Perhaps most unsettling is how the game commodifies this tragedy. After uncovering the full story of the Valtaum, players receive a relic that grants empire-wide bonuses when activated. Their crisis becomes our strategic advantage. Their collective death becomes our resource. This gameplay mechanic unintentionally reinforces the very philosophical problem at the heart of their story: the reduction of conscious beings to game objects. Like the Cold and Alone event, the game offers no special acknowledgement of the philosophical weight of what we've just witnessed. After uncovering evidence of trillions of beings who correctly identified themselves as simulated entities and died trying to escape, players simply collect their relic and move on. The Empire management screen demands attention. Another war may be brewing. Resources need allocation. The Valtaum tragedy exemplifies how Stellaris creates its most profound moments not through spectacles, but through implication. There are no cinematics of mass suicide, no dramatical musical cues, just text that invites us to imagine the unimaginable. And sometimes the most disturbing aspect isn't what we discover about these ancient aliens, but what we discover about ourselves as players when we encounter them. While the Cold and Alone event presents a tragedy we merely witness, and the Valtaum storyline explores philosophical horror at a distance, the Kalanka event does something far more unsettling. It makes us an unwitting participant in a catastrophe. The event begins innocuously enough. Your science team discovers evidence of subterranean structures on a planet. The first phases of excavation reveal an extensive underground civilization with remarkable architectural advancements. Nothing in these early findings suggest anything beyond the routine archaeological discoveries that pepper the Stellaris experience. As the dig progresses, your archaeologists document striking statues found throughout the underground complex. The event text describes these figures in artistic terms. Their lifelike quality, their diverse poses capturing beings in the midst of everyday activities. Some appear to be running, others working, others in conversation. The detail is remarkable, though the species is unfamiliar. What makes the Kalanka event uniquely disturbing is the gradual nature of its revelation. Unlike many Stellaris events that deliver their narrative payload in a single text box, this story unfolds over multiple excavation stages, allowing the player to develop assumptions that will later be horrifically subverted. The moment of revelation comes in a clinical, almost casual update from your science team. These aren't statues at all. The Kalanka were a living, thriving civilization until your archaeological expedition breached their sealed environment. The digging process introduced surface gases into their habitat, gases that instantly crystallized their bodies, freezing them in place mid-motion. This is where the Kalanka event differs fundamentally from most tragedy narratives in Stellaris. The horror isn't ancient, it isn't something that happened millions of years ago to a long-dead species. It happened moments ago. It happened because of you. Your curiosity, your routine archaeological expedition, your desire for those +5 society research points. These seemingly innocent actions resulted in the instantaneous extinction of an entire civilization. There is no button to undo what you've done, no mechanic for remorse. What's done is done. Your empire's archaeological log will forever contain this record of accidental genocide, a footnote in your civilization's expansion among the stars. What's perhaps most disturbing about this event is the complete lack of mechanical consequences. Your empire suffers no diplomatic penalty, no ethics shift, no happiness reduction among your population. The game systems, designed to track war atrocities and intentional genocides, have no framework for this kind of accidental extinction. Your game's story continues uninterrupted, the Kalanka just another entry in your situation log. This narrative hits differently than other extinction stories because it transforms archaeology, typically portrayed in games as a purely beneficial knowledge-seeking endeavor, into something accidentally and potentially catastrophic. It challenges the player's assumptions that discovering the past is always a noble pursuit with zero consequences. What's particularly noteworthy is how different this is from how most games handle moral choices. In a BioWare RPG or a Telltale adventure, such a revelation would trigger a dramatic music cue, a morality shift, perhaps even a companion's reaction. The consequence would be systemized, quantified, and integrated into the game's choice architecture. Stellaris instead leaves the moral weight entirely in the player's imagination, unacknowledged by any game system. The detail that often haunts players most is the description of the Kalanka frozen in everyday activities. A permanent monument to the moment of their extinction. This isn't the dignified end of a species that saw their doom approaching, like the Cold and Alone event. It's not a philosophical choice like the Valtaum. It's the sudden interruption of ordinary life, preserved forever in crystalline form. The banality makes it all the more terrifying. What connects the Kalanka to our other stories is how Stellaris uses minimalist text to create maximum emotional impact. We never see a single image of a crystallized being. We never hear the voices cut short mid-sentence. Yet people report feeling genuine remorse upon finding those few sentences describing what their expedition had done. It's a testament to how effectively simple text can engage our moral imagination. While many of Stellaris' most affecting narratives are self-contained events, the story of the Baol unfolds as part of a complete precursor chain similar to the Valtaum. However, where the Valtaum tale is one of philosophical horror, the Baol presents something different. A methodical documentation of genocide, followed by a face-to-face encounter with its final survivor. The discovery begins obliquely. Your archaeologists are actively investigating another extinct species called the Greneur, a militaristic empire from 7 million years ago. It's through Greneur data crystals that you first learn about the Baol, initially just mentioned as adversaries in an ancient conflict. The Baol are gradually revealed to be a plantoid hive mind, at least 10 million years old, evolved from the flora of their homeworld. The archaeological evidence paints a picture of a peaceful, almost utopian civilization. They developed organic technology, terraformed barren worlds into gardens, and shared an emphatic connection across vast distances. There's a subtle melancholy in how the event text describes their achievements, knowing as we do that they no longer exist. The true horror emerges as your archaeologists piece together what happened to them. On a world called Harborbas 2A, now barren and lifeless, they discover evidence of a planet-wide inferno. The Greneur hadn't invaded to capture resources. They had firebombed the entire planet from orbit, deliberately targeting the plant-based Baol, causing catastrophic ecosystem collapse that eventually destroyed the atmosphere itself. The second site reveals not a planet, but its remains. The Greneur had literally cracked the world apart rather than bother with firebombing again. The clinical tone of the archaeology reports creates a chilling contrast with the scale of destruction they document. The Greneur records describe the Baol as feeble and slow to react, a peaceful species wholly unprepared for such calculated aggression. On the third world, your team discovers that the Grineer shifted tactics, enslaving the Baol instead of destroying them outright. The archaeological evidence shows how, over centuries of captivity, the Baol's neural structure changed. They began losing their hive mind connection, possibly developing individual consciousness as their collective bond deteriorated. The narrative culminates with the discovery of a distress signal from an ancient Grineer research facility. Unlike most archaeological sites in Stellaris, which deal with traces of the long dead, this one delivers a stunning revelation. Deep within the facility, surrounded by failed life support systems and the decayed remains of other specimens, your team discovers a living Baol. What follows is perhaps the most poignant moment in any Stellaris event chain. The last Baol, somehow surviving for millions of years in a deteriorating containment vat, communicates with your scientists. The game notes that it takes minutes to form sentences, a small detail that conveys both the creature's ancient nature and the immense effort it makes to share its story. It speaks not with bitterness, but with a profound sadness, referring to the Grineer as the Burners and expressing regret not at their cruelty but its own species' inability to respond quickly enough as their worlds burned. There's no call for vengeance, no final curse, just the weary reflection of a being who has outlived its entire species by millions of years. Then comes the moment that affects players most deeply. After sharing its story, the last Baol requests that your scientists turn off the life support systems. It has existed alone for an unimaginable span of time, surrounded by the preserved remains of its kin, and now seeks the peace of extinction. Crucially, the game offers no choice here. You are given no choice. The decision is already made. You aren't the savior in this story, only the witness. The event simply informs you that your scientists have honored its request. The last member of a 10 million year old civilization passes quietly into extinction, seen only by your research team. And then the game does what it always does. It gives you something. A relic, a piece of advanced bioengineering that can terraform barren worlds into paradises, along with 4 artificially grown nubile pops, genetic echoes of the species you just watched die. It's a reward, but it doesn't feel like one. What makes the Baol story so haunting is how it combines multiple forms of tragedy. The historical horror of systematic genocide, the existential weight of surviving alone for millions of years, and now the uncomfortable question of legacy. Are the new Baol truly Baol? Or are they just living relics, stripped of memory, of voice, of choice? The original asked only to be allowed to die. The game honored that request, and then resurrected their genome as a bonus. The system moves on, but the story doesn't forget. The Baol, the Kalanka, the Valtaum, that last data card in the dark. These moments linger, not because they alter the course of your empire, but because they ask something most games never do. Should we have done that? As we journey back to where we began, those 11 words that inspired this exploration, we find ourselves changed. We've traversed the hidden emotional landscape of Stellaris, a game ostensibly about empire management and galactic conquest, yet secretly housing some of gaming's most affecting narratives. The philosophical Valtaum, who realized they lived in a simulation and died trying to escape it. The crystallized Kalanka, frozen in mid-sentence by our own curiosity. The ancient Baol, speaking to us across millions of years before choosing final peace. Each story, delivered through simple text, creates moments of unexpected emotional depth. What makes these narratives so effective isn't elaborate cinematic sequences or voice acting. It's the stark contrast between the game's mechanical systems and these sudden glimpses of existential poignancy in a genre where sentient beings are typically reduced to resources and strategic assets. These stories, momentarily at least, force us to see beyond the abstraction. Remember the veteran player who inspired this video. Someone who had been deployed to some awful places, seen birth and death, watched an old man die with his hopes and dreams. yet still found themselves deeply moved by the simple sentence. It was cold and alone, and it was ready to give up. This reaction speaks to something fundamental about how stories affect us. In an era of gaming defined by cinematic experiences with elaborate motion capture, celebrity voice acting, and Hollywood production values, Stellaris reminds us of something essential. Sometimes, the most affecting narratives are the ones that give just enough detail to activate our imaginations. Like a haiku or a powerful photograph, these text events create emotional resonance through suggestion rather than explicit depiction. The power of the saddest sentence in gaming lies not just in what it says, but in what it asks of us. To imagine the unimaginable loneliness of being the last of your kind, to consider what it means to surrender after generations of struggle, to momentarily inhabit a perspective utterly alien to our own. These brief narratives create what the novelist Ursula K. Le Guin described as the power of imagination to foster perception and compassion and hope. For her, it is through imagining the lives of others, even fictional ones, that we achieve empathy and moral understanding. For a moment, we feel the beings that never existed, yet somehow embody truths about existence itself. Its fragility, its persistence, and ultimately, its finitude. 11 words, a simple declaration about an unnamed alien in a video game. Yet in these words, we find a distillation of what makes narrative in games uniquely powerful. Not just entertainment or distraction, but windows into experiences and perspectives beyond our own. In the vastness of Stellaris' procedurally generated universe, these tiny stories remind us of what connects all sentient beings, real or imagined, the universal experiences of struggle, loss, and surrender. Perhaps this is why these stories linger with us long after we've closed the game. Why a veteran with a lifetime of real-world experiences could be moved by a simple text box about an extinct alien. Because in those brief moments between managing our empires and conquering the stars, Stellaris reminds us that behind every abstraction, every population number, every conquered planet, every extinct species, there might be a story worth pausing for. A story that, despite its brevity, says everything about what it means to be cold, to be alone, and to be ready to give up. Oh, okay, well, thank you for watching. This shorter video. The idea of this video was I was playing Stellaris a bunch, and I wanted to make a video on it, basically. But first of all, thank you so much to the Patreons and the members of the channel. That being the Milkman, Aroxino, Vinicus Franca, Ice Bear, and a Brick Wall. Honestly, support means more than you know. If you want to support these videos and get some glimpse behind the scenes, then do make sure to join the channel or join the Patreon. Obviously, you do not have to. It is completely optional, but I'm going to start producing some Patreon/member-only content just because YouTube's kind of trying to push it at the moment. So if you want to support me at all, you know, that is the way. But also, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I hope you did. I really like making this one. Honestly, it was such... I saw that Reddit post when I was just doom scrolling at like 2 AM, and I was like, oh my god, that would make a fucking perfect video. So, thank you. I'll leave that Reddit post below if you want to go read it for yourself. Just, you know. I did take some of the stories in this video from that Reddit post, but it's just really good. But yeah, let me know down below what you'd like me to cover in the future. I think I'm going to try and do more of these, like, more general video essay type things rather than focusing on games, because there's a lot more broad of an audience that it can reach, I think. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But yeah, thank you so much for watching again, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye-bye.